I just wanted to talk about this story with you. It's about exactly what we're talking about right now. And the headline is The End of the Warrior Met Strike and the Utter Failure of the Democratic Imagination. After almost 2 years on the picket lines, the hundreds of United Mine Workers of America members who have been on strike at Warrior Met Coal in Alabama have offered to go back to work. They still don't have a fair contract they have sacrificed so much for. Their negotiations will continue, but they did not win the strike, and that's what's tragic. The company and its private equity owners bear the most direct responsibility for precipitating this heartless, inhuman struggle. But if you're looking for a meaningful place to focus your rage over the way that this strike has turned out, look directly at the Democratic Party. Imagine, hypothetically, that we were living in a period of history in which inequality has soared for half a century, thanks in large part to the decline of unions and working class bargaining power, in which the American dream has been hollowed out and decades of economic gains have flowed almost exclusively to the rich, in which poorly designed free trade policies supported by Democrats have sucked middle-class America dry of once abundant blue-collar jobs, in which the obvious failures of neoliberalism to rectify this situation have soured millions of once reliable blue voters on the Democratic Party and tempted them into a Republican Party that offers easy scapegoats for systemic problems, in which this toxic lack of opportunity paved the way for a xenophobic, lying narcissist to spend 4 years in the White House on the strength of racist fables about making America great again. Imagine further that after dark 4 years, the Democrats were back in power and they had a leader who proclaimed himself to be the most pro-union president of our lifetime, and that he led a party that fretted continuously about how to win back working class voters from the clutches of Trumpism. Then imagine that there was a long grinding strike by coal miners in Alabama who were fighting against the predations of the sort of ultra-insulated capitalist financiers who are accelerating the inequality crisis. Imagine that walkout became the longest major strike in America, dragging on well past the point when most people would have given up, with the strikers assaulted by oppressive police and court rulings. And yet, for month after month, these workers persevered, held the line, and sacrificed greatly in order to fight for dignity and the fundamental ability for working people to be treated fairly by the faceless forces of capital. It is obvious to anyone with an ounce of imagination that this scenario represents more than a single local fight. It contains the potential to be a powerful symbol, not just a generic workers fight back photo op for politicians, but a very specific inspirational symbol of what the Democratic Party could and should be. What better way to overcome the cynical but effective Republican strategy of declaring itself the party of regular working Americans than to actually be the party of regular working Americans? What better way to overcome the accusations that Democrats are ivory tower elites that go all out to support a justified heroic strike of blue-collar workers in a red state? Why wasn't Joe Biden on the picket line in Brookwood, Alabama? Why wasn't Labor Secretary Marty Walsh at any of the big rallies the UMWA held over the past 2 years? Why weren't these strikers invited to guests at the State of the Union? Why weren't Democratic senators and congresspeople on the ground giving speeches for the strikers again and again? Where was everyone? Where were the ads rallying international support that should have blanketed America before the midterm elections? Why did the Democrats let this potent symbol slip through their grasp? The utter failure to harness the political potential of the Warrior Met strike is not the most important failure here. That would be the failure to support the substance of the strike, because this was not just some missed photo op for Democrats. This was an instance in which Democrats failed to support what should be the core platform of the Democratic Party. What are the only institutions that can bring together people of different races and political persuasions in the Deep South? Unions. What is the key to rolling back our inequality crisis? Unions. How do you start to change the electorate in deep red states and open their eyes to worker power? Unions. What do unions need to advertise themselves to people unfamiliar with their power? They need successful strikes. Besides workers, who has the decline of unions in the middle hurt the most, it's hurt Democrats. And so when the Democrats crushed that railroad union strike, which was going to win, what they did was they changed the whole course of our country. They made people not believe in strikes. They made people not believe in unions. They made people not believe in collective bargaining or coming together to work together because the government will just crush it. And so there isn't an example of a victory. And that's what people need. Let me turn it over to you. And what do you have to say about this whole situation and how it relates to the Democrats' failure and the left's failure in general?
No, this question of unions and the approach to strike action and the idea of using the strike action as a weapon of building working class power, that goes to the heart of the matter. But just very quickly, just before I go to that, I think this article really captures powerfully how Trump and the Trump presidency was all a con man job. You know, he was never on the side of working people. He actually was on the side of the billionaire class. And in fact, what made him inconvenient to the billionaire class was not that he wasn't on their side, because he was, but because he occasionally spoke the truth.
Yes.
And they couldn't really control him. And, they want a reliable ally, a reliable lieutenant in the White House. You know, the ruling class and Wall Street need a reliable lieutenant in the White House. And in fact, Joe Biden has delivered many times over the way he helped crush the railroad, led in crushing of the railroad strike, is a powerful example of that as well. I do think, though, that contrary to what this article might be suggesting, it's not really, the Democratic Party have proven themselves as not a party of working people. So step number one, you were asking earlier, how do we get to this new party? Well, step number one is not believing that the Democratic Party is someday, somehow, just maybe going to change its, change its tune and maybe finally start representing working people. That is not going to happen. People talk about building a new party as maybe that's some pie in the sky, we can't do it. Well, what's pie in the sky is hoping that the Democratic Party will change its color. We have to stop wishing that. And in fact, that is why we need a new party. But as far as what are the obstacles to doing this, what the approach of the most of the labor leadership is an obstacle to building a new party, and they are also an obstacle to building a fighting labor movement, because a fighting labor movement is one that bases itself on rank and file organizing and on class struggle methods, one that recognizes that our interests as workers are fundamentally at odds with those of the bosses and the billionaires, and that is what is wrong at root with the current approach that most labor leaders, who are also not coincidentally tied at the hip with the Democratic Party, the ideas that these labor leaders who are tied to the Democratic Party, they use this approach, what we would call business unionism. In short, business unionism is the idea that workers should let labor leaders, the members of the union should not get involved. They should just be quiet. They should not get uppity, and the labor leaders can quietly negotiate contracts with the bosses, which are often filled with defeats for workers rather than actively organizing themselves. But the problem with this whole idea is, it's like not recognizing what capitalism is all about, like refusing to understand the basics of how capitalism works. The bosses are never going to concede with any demands of the workers unless they are absolutely forced to, because their profits are direct, and their power, are directly derived from underpaying workers and from keeping workers repressed, keeping them subjugated. And one of the hallmarks of business unionism, and this is coming to your point, is preventing strikes at all costs. Business unionists put their stress on the bargaining process, the so-called process, and they fear antagonizing management by any real mobilization of workers, much less going on strike. And we need that kind of militant fighting ideas that the labor movement was built on in the first place. We would not have one union in the first place if the early labor leaders had used this pro-boss, let's do a class snuggle versus a class struggle approach. No, actually, they made enormous sacrifices, often with just being, actually paying for it with their lives to build the labor movement that we have today. And just to give you a concrete example from recent times, in 2021, the rank and file carpenters of the Pacific Northwest Carpenters Union went on strike. The rank and file went on strike in defiance of the Leadership Council, and they went on strike after having voted against, the rank and file voted against 4 tentative agreements, tentative contracts, because they were bad contracts, even though the leadership kept telling them they should vote yes. And in fact, later on, a year later, it came out that the leadership actually was involved in vote rigging. It was really disgraceful, and the whole leadership has now been disbanded. But at that time, those rank and file workers went courageously on strike, and not a single Democrat or labor leader was on their side. And you know who was on their side? Socialist Alternative and I. And we were demonized as anti-Semites, anti-woman, anti-everything, but the workers knew that we were on their side. And just to give an example of how we can unite people on class issues, one of the workers who spoke in our really high-profile press conference was this ex-Marine, two-time Trump voter who shook my hand and said, I never thought I would be shaking the hand of a communist, but here I am because socialists are the only ones who have stood by me. The Democrats have let us down. Our labor leaders have let us down. And socialists are here with us. So that's the history of genuine socialism, genuine Marxism, understanding how we can win working people over on a class issue. But that's a small example. That needs to happen on a bigger scale. Like going forward, the most immediate targets for the left should be to help to build strong action at the UPS, in the UPS contract, build for a strong strike action. The port workers, the longshore workers on the West Coast, their contract is up for renewal. We should be looking to build strong strike action on that front as well. These are strategic opportunities. And also keep in mind that both of these examples, longshore workers and UPS workers, and also Amazon warehouse workers, these are strategically located workers because they work at choke points for capitalism. So if we are able to build powerful solidarity around them, and we can shut these workplaces down, carry out inspiring strike actions, win some solid victories, that will strike fear in the heart of the capitalist beast, because we are going for their profits, and that is what will send a real message.
Agreed. And it's got to come from the workers. Mm-hmm. And one more thing I'd like to ask you about before you take off is that much of the so-called left embraces censorship. It's hard to have solidarity with people who are constantly telling you to shut up and trying to take away your free speech. And I oppose censorship here. I always they use the guise. I've tried to point out that the people who are always censored are the powerless, right? The people who are trying to fight back against the powerful. And so now they try to couch censorship as if they are protecting the vulnerable. It's the exact opposite. That is such a shifty card to play, that saying censorship protects, because then you can't have hate speech, and that's what's actually bad for minority people. No, what's actually bad for minority people is taking away their freedom of speech to speak against the powerful. And that's why I'm against censorship. And anybody who tells you that censorship on Twitter or Facebook is there to help marginalized people have been propagandized, or they're a liar. What's your stance on censorship?
Oh, absolutely. There is no defense of censorship whatsoever. And in fact, these are all just ruses. They use these as sort of nice sounding excuses that, maybe this is good for people of color and so on. I'll tell you one thing. For me, as a woman of color, immigrant woman of color, Marxist, there is no corporate media or corporate institution supporting my right to say what I'm saying, my anti-establishment speech, because I'm a woman of color and that my rights should be protected. So really, these excuses that are couched in terms of identity, when they come from the elite or their institutions or their state, they are immediately suspect, and they are just meant to sanitize what they're really trying to do, which is cover up for their desire to use every institution at their disposal to keep workers from understanding that there is a lot of solidarity. One of the things that the capitalist class requires in order to keep workers subjugated is to make them feel atomized, isolated. Like if you're angry, then maybe it's just you. Maybe you just messed up in your life and you don't know what's going on. But if millions of workers know that actually I'm far from alone, there's so many others who agree with me, and maybe they don't agree with me on everything, but we agree on so much, and we really want to fight to change society. Well, that will be a completely different ballgame, and the ruling class doesn't want it. And unfortunately, what happens is that it's not just, obviously it's corporate media that's complicit in it. Obviously, it's the Democratic and Republican establishment, Wall Street interests, and all the big corporations that own these media outlets. but it is also many leaders in the NGO complex. There are leaders in the labor leadership. There are so many sections of society where we have so-called leaders who are really misleaders. And so I think part of what needs to happen is a bold questioning of who's actually on our side and who is not. That's the actual debate that needs to happen.
Well, that's what happened around Forced to Vote. It was a very big mask-off moment when I thought it was going to be a slam dunk for people on the left, because we've all agreed that we need to get a vote on Medicare for all on the House floor. That would be a huge victory. Everybody from Nancy Pelosi to AOC to me agreed that for a generation that was a goal. And as soon as it became possible, well, we all find out half the left isn't actually, they're actually infiltrators who are there to divide. People like Ryan Grimm from The Intercept, Ryan Grimm from Breaking Point, Cenk Uygur at the Young Turks, those types of people were there to muddy the waters.
Gatekeepers. Yeah, they're gatekeepers. They're not really representatives of the interests of the left or the working class. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But yeah, you're exactly right. And in fact, that was really a telling moment, and we've had many telling moments since then. Those who gave cover to the Democrats, much less the squad, for selling out on Forced to Vote, it really showed which side they're on. They're trying to give cover to those who have betrayed working people, and those of us who said that actually this needs to be done, we were really showing what actually leadership on the left looks like. And so it needs to be highlighted how, in fact, recently when the Freedom Caucus and the MAGA squad from the right showed that Forced to Vote can be done, and obviously I have serious disagreements with the right wing, and it's an extremely dangerous phenomenon. But what they showed is that Forced to Vote can be done, and in response to that, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they said things like, well, if you did that, there would be relational harm. That was a rare moment of honesty. Actually, we should talk about that, because it was a rare moment of honesty. Because what it revealed is that even though the members of the so-called squad, in whom there were a lot of expectations that they would actually fight, the approach that they use and the reason they use phrases like relational harm. I mean, you will never catch me saying shit like relational harm. The reason that they say that is because it reveals, what it reveals about them is their priority is to not make enemies out of the elite in Washington, D.C. So if that's your priority, then it doesn't matter what intentions you started out with. It doesn't matter whatsoever. Lots of people ask me, but didn't they have good intentions, the squad? I said, I don't care. My job is not to divine what's going on in their brains now or earlier. The point is, regardless of your intentions, if your priority and if your interest is in not making enemies out of Nancy Pelosi and other powerful people, much less Joe Biden, then you are going to betray. Doesn't matter what you want to do. That's what you're going to end up doing. And that is why we need elected representation of a fundamentally different kind. And unfortunately, the way we have used our office in the last 10 years is one of the rare examples where, when I go to City Hall, I don't go telling myself, oh, these 8 Democrats on the city council, they are my colleagues. No. To the extent that they're willing to be on my side with working people, yes. But that's the exception to the rule. Overwhelmingly, they are not on the side of working people. And that makes me public enemy number one in their eyes. And I am okay with that. And in fact, I would be worried if the Democrats started thinking of me as somebody who's nice to them, then that would be hugely worrisome, because then I would be selling out.
Yes. Very well said. You speak with great clarity. I'm excited about your new organization, workersstrikeback.org. Everybody check that out. They're going to have a action this Saturday. Kshama Sawant, thanks so much. Thanks for your leadership, and thanks for your clarity, and thanks for coming on and sharing your ideas with our audience. I hope you come back soon.
Thank you so much, and I'll be happy to.
Doing live stand-up comedy in Tempe, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, Nashville, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, Cohoes, New York, and Hartford, Connecticut. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets and become a premium member. Get access to all our content.